wanted to create a short video that explains some of the parameters and some of the things I think you should try to do in your final project, and some of the things you must do. For instance, here's the basic instructions, which I have emailed you. They're also in Canvas in our class, and it tells you that you have to do the project in Word, Excel, Access, and PowerPoint. The documents must be submitted in those formats. If you submit them in any other format, it will automatically be a 0, because a lot of folks are using Mac products, and if you use the Mac Office that comes along with the machine and you submit it in that format, I will not be able to open it. I'm not going to chase anyone down to get them to convert that file. You must submit the documents in Microsoft Office format. Below that, it talks about the project topics, and I've emailed you about this before, and you pretty much can choose your own topic. If it's one of the choices that's in this list down to where it says native country or culture, you don't need to necessarily email me to get my approval for the project topic. If, however, you choose something else, I may ask you some questions, and you probably should clear the topic with me if it's not from this list. Then it talks about the minimum requirements, and below that it gets into the very specifics of each of the documents themselves. The first one is going to be Microsoft Access. For all of these tools, you're going to open the software and create a brand new blank document for each one of these. So in the case of Access, I will go ahead and open a brand new blank document. When you open Access, it either asks you to open one of the previous Access databases or a blank database. You're going to open a blank database. So I'm going to choose that, and if I double click on it, it opens and creates the database. It automatically names it as Database 1. You're going to give it a different name later on. It also automatically creates the table. As you can see, it says create a database with the file using your last name underscore final project. And I will say, when I save this document, I'll do a save as and name the file correctly. Then you're going to create a table. I've already done that by opening this up. When I opened up a brand new blank database file, it created table 1 for me. Now I can right click on table 1, and I can right click on it over here, and I can give it a different name than table 1, a better name. In the case of this project, I'm going to be doing what I refer to as the dream vacation, and for each of the documents, they're all going to be based on the dream vacation. For Access, I'm going to create a name and address list of the people who are going to go with me on this dream vacation. The first thing I do, and by the way, you notice that the first field is generic. It's an ID field. It's all that is doing is it's going to number your records automatically. It's an auto-generated ID number. It's just going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That one is not one of your required fields. You have to have 5 fields across the top up here. So I'm going to right-click on Click to Add, and I'm going to select Short Text. You notice there's a whole list of things. You can create any number of different kinds of fields, very specific to the kind of information you're going to store in that field. I'm going to be using short text for this one, and I'm going to call this one, when I click on short text, I'm going to call this one last name. And when I click the tab key, it goes to the next one where it says click to add. I'm going to click to add another short text, and it's going to be first name. The next one is going to be street address. That's also going to be short text. You probably think, well, it's a number if it's a street address, but it is still just text. Then city, state, and zip, still, again, all short text. Now, you might think that zip code would be a number, and it's going to be a number. However, I selected short text because you're not going to use it as a number. You're not going to do calculations with it. So you really don't want to use it as anything except text. The next one I'm going to use is going to be phone number. And it's, again, phone numbers really aren't going to be numbers, or they're going to be entered as numbers, but they're just text. You're not going to do any calculations with the phone number. So I'm going to select short text, and I'm going to use phone number. So I have now created my fields. I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 fields. So I've more than exceeded my number of fields I require. Now, in this table, I'm going to actually enter data. So in this, I'm going to click in this box. I don't need to put anything in the ID field. Remember, I could actually delete that field. I don't need it. But I'm just going to leave it there. And when I click in last name, I'm going to enter the person's last name. And I'm going to put in the data that would go along with that person. And I'll enter all the data for that person. And when I hit enter, it takes me down to the next line where I can enter the rest of my data. This line right here is the data for the first record. Remember, Access is divided into tables, which hold all your data, fields, which are the individual kinds of data you're going to store, and then the records, which will be each of the people in this particular database, each of the people that you're going to enter information about. You need at least 6 records to be at the minimum. So I would go ahead and I would enter another person.
I'm not sure I understand.
And you just keep on entering the data. Each person in this case is going to be a record, and you're going to enter the data into the table. When I have all of the data entered into the table, then I will close the table, by clicking on the little X. It automatically asks if I want to save the changes that I've made. I'll say yes. It asks me, do I want to name the table something other than Table 1? And you can call your table whatever it is that relates to the data that you're entering. That makes it easier. When you start getting into multiple tables, the names become important because you need to very quickly be able to identify the tables and what they're about. So now you can see I have my table right here. If I wanted to open it again, all you have to do is double click on it and you can see that it gets back to where it was. When I close it this time, because I've not made any changes, it will not ask me those questions again. Tables, and I'll open my table again. You can see that I'm in the design view where I was adding fields across the top. Note that where the field is, it's in the gray line. If you enter the field name in the first line, that's incorrect. You should go back and start over if you're using Access. And up here in the tools, you have the View button. I'm looking at this table currently in the datasheet view. I want to look at the design view because the next step right down here is to assign a primary key. And you're going to see that Access has already assigned a primary key. What is a primary key? If you remember from your reading and from your work with Connect, the primary key is the field that is unique in this particular table. The unique field that's in this table. And Access, because it wants to help you as much as possible, created this ID field. Each one of the entries in the ID field is automatic, and it's simply numbering them. That makes each individual entry, each record, have a unique ID. However, if you're using some other kind of data, you may decide that you want to have the phone number as the primary key, in which case I would click down here and create the phone number as the primary key. If none of your friends that are entered in this database have the same phone number, you could do that. You can't enter anything, you can't make a primary key that might be duplicated in one of the records, inside of one of the records. So, last name, if you're using people, they sometimes have similar last names or the same last name. They may live in the same city, the same state, have the same zip code, and sometimes if they're from the same family, perhaps even the same phone number, but most people have a unique phone number. So in the case of this, you could have just left this. The primary key was already assigned. It really is not an issue as long as you have a primary key. So I'm going to close my table by clicking the X. Because I've gone in here and changed the primary key, I changed the design, so I do want to save the design. So I say yes. And because I have this is giving me a slight warning here. If I go back to my datasheet view, it doesn't like my primary key. I'm going to take it back and leave the primary key in the ID field. You notice what happened was I have a third line down here, and that's what it was referring to when I was giving me that warning. There's nothing in this particular line for I was using phone number. In fact, there's nothing in the phone number for the second line. So you can't have a blank cell in your record because it gives you that error. So if you get that error, that's where it's coming from. In the next step, it reminds you that you have to have a form. Now, you don't have to go and create a fancy form. Access is used on a professional basis, and one of the things you can do, if someone hands you a form in a doctor's office and you're filling it out on a clipboard, they're going to take that back into the office and they're going to put that data that you filled out on that piece of paper into a database. And that database probably has a form that looks just like the piece of paper so that it's for ease of entry. But for our purposes, we don't need to be fancy. I just want you to know how to do these things in case you run across it again. If you're ever going to try to do this on a professional level, you'll have to take multiple access classes, and it would get very intense. In our case, I've closed my table. I'm going to go up to the Create tab. Notice our tabs across the top. I'm going to click the Create tab, and this is where I could create another table if I needed to. I can create a query. We'll get to that in just a minute. I'm going to create a form. I can go to form design, and that's where you really get into the nuts and bolts of this, where you actually design forms and make them look like pieces of paper if you need to. For our purposes, however, we're going to click the form button. I'm going to make sure I have the table clicked if I haven't already done so. I don't need it open. But I'm going to click the form button, and it's going to create a form. It's going to automatically name the form Friends. It's even going to show you the data that's in it. You can scroll through the data that's in your table, and this form could be used to enter the data. And right down here, it shows me what record I'm on. If I click here, I'm on Chuck, but if I click the arrow, it moves me down to Sandy, and I could go in and I could enter the data in the form if I needed to. So I now have a form. If I click the close button, it's going to ask if I want to just save it. I'm going to click OK, and now I have a table called Friends and a form called Friends. Our next step is to create queries. Queries are how you get the data back out of a table. Just as the name implies, a query is a question. So I'm going to use a query and ask the database to give me some of my data from my table. So I'm going to go again to Create, and I'm going to use the Query Wizard. You can use Query Design. It gets a little more complex, but Query Wizard works just fine for our purposes. I'm going to use a simple Query Wizard. I'm just going to click OK. And all you have to do is select the data that you want in this query. Out of the fields that we have, which fields do you want to show in this query? As it says, you must create a query with at least 3 fields. I'm going to skip the ID field. I don't need that one. I'm going to use last name, first name, and phone number. I'm going to click Finish. I could go to the query design if I wanted to, but I'm not going to. I'm going to click Finish, open the query to view information, and there's my query. It's called the Friends query, and you could change the name if you wish to. So I can just close this, and now I have a new query. Our next step asks us to create a query containing 4 fields and sort the query on your choice of field. So again, I'm going to make sure I'm clicked on the Friends table so that that's where it's going to get the data from. I'm going to go to Create. I'm going to use the query wizard. Simple query. I'm going to select 4 fields this time. Click next. It asks me if this name is okay. I'm going to call it the Friends Query Sorted, because that's what we're going to do. We're going to sort this. It's not going to be very interesting sorts because I don't have very much data in there. And I'm going to modify, in order to do a sort, I have to modify the query design. So I'm going to, instead of using the default, I'm going to click Modify Query Design, click Finish, and it puts me into the design view of the query. And let's say, for instance, I want to sort this on their last name. Notice there's a line here that says sort. If I click in that line, it has ascending and descending. Depending upon the kind of data you have in there, if it's numbers, it'll go in ascending would be numbers getting bigger. If it's descending, it's numbers starting out with the larger one and getting smaller. If it's text like their names are, it will be ascending will be alphabetical. Descending would be reverse alphabetical. So I'm going to click ascending, and then I'm going to view my query by clicking the View button. And you notice that the way I'd entered them, I put Chuck in first. His last name was Fleming. Sandy's last name starts with a B, so it has sorted them alphabetically. So this query and the sort for the query, which is going to ask me to save it when I close it, worked correctly. The next requirement is to create a query with at least 3 fields and restrict the query results with your choice of criteria. This time, I'm going to make a query. To use the query wizard. I'm going to last name and first name. I'm going to add city and zip code. I can put state in there as well, it doesn't matter. And zip code. Click next. I'm going to call this one, it'll just keep numbering them, by the way. If you don't change this, it'll make them Friends Query 1, Query 2, Query 3, etc. I'll call this one the restricted. Again, I need to go into the Modify Design, click Finish, and now I'm going to restrict it. I want it to be sorted as well, so I'm going to sort it alphabetically, but I also want I want it to only show me the people who live in Tampa. So in the criteria, I simply type what I want to look for, what I want this query to sort and restrict it to. So I only want the people who live in Tampa. When I run the query, notice that it only showed me Chuck because he lives in Tampa. Next is to create a report based on the table again. Everything is always based on the table. So I'm going to close this restricted query that we've already done. I do have to save it. I'm going to go to Create, and this time I want to create a report. I'm just going to click the Report button, I don't want to do a design. It can be very complicated. And I've still got the table highlighted. So when I click report, it's going to generate a report. And if I had more data, it would show the rest of the data down here. I'm going to close my report. It's going to ask me to save it. I'm going to save it as friends. Everything will be based on the table, and it's all we called friends. But you can see that each of these objects over here are all based on the friends table. Even though they have the word friends in them, they're different kinds of objects. The reason I have more than one query, so I had to give them individual names. So now I'm going to close my file. It's going to go to File, Save As, and I'm going to save this database, Save As, and I'm going to give it, instead of the generic name that it's giving it, it's going to ask me where to put it, and I'm going to just call it Friends, and then I'm going to click Save. And that will be the database file that I submit for my project.